Dr. Bob. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. So, as Dr. Bob said, my name is Heather, Heather Thompson, and my journey started about 26 years ago. On April 29th, 1995, my brother David was murdered. He was murdered by an acquaintance. And at the time, our family was told it was because David was gay. David lived his life completely authentic, was open, he was proud, a genuinely good person, had a beautiful heart, a beautiful soul, and he liked to help people. And that's how he met his acquaintance, Brian, who was eventually convicted of his murder. So at that time, I was a 19-year-old kid. I was in school. I was studying pre-law. I wanted to be a juvenile public defender in Miami, very specifically. And that night, everything changed. I became angry at the system and everything that, kind of went with it. And I would go to court and we would have hearings. And initially, during motions hearings and during the beginning stages of the trial, I said a lot of horrible things to Brian, to his attorney, out of anger, out of frustration. And in 1995, Montgomery County didn't, or I live in Montgomery County, Maryland. And at that time, Montgomery County didn't really have a victim coordinator with their state's attorney's office. So we didn't really have anyone to walk us through the process. We relied on the support of our family, our friends. We had an amazing prosecutor who later became my son's godfather, because we had grown close over the years. And all I could think at 19 was, why did this happen to my brother? Why is the system the way it is? And I was very adamant that Brian should face the harshest sentence possible. And in Maryland, we don't have the death penalty, but I was very much an advocate for it at the time because David was my hero. And I thought that this was the only way I'd be able to receive justice and closure. So that was 26 years ago. And little by little over the years, I slowly started to change my perspective on how our system works. And ironically, about 10 years after David died, I went back to Montgomery County Courthouse and started working there as a courtroom clerk. And so I would be in the courtroom and I would hear cases and I would hear the same thing over and over again. Someone had committed the same crime and they had, gotten the same sentence and nothing changed. It was no matter how much time someone got, they always came back. It was like a revolving door. So I continued to look at our system as something that made me angry and it was frustrating. And eventually I came in contact with Brian during a court hearing. And I had reached a point where I had found some forgiveness and I was ready and willing to see him in the courtroom for his hearing. And I got to the courtroom and I immediately started crying because a whole rush of emotions and feelings came over me. And I remember he looked at me and he said, "Why is she crying?" And the sheriff said, "Well, she's the sister. She's David's sister. You should know who she is." And David and I look exactly alike. So I found it really hard to believe that he didn't know who I was. And the first thing he said after that was, "I didn't kill that faggot." So any bit of forgiveness I felt in that moment was gone. And I left angry once again. I saw him about 2 more times in 2 more hearings. My mom came to one of the hearings and my mom was angry as well. And as the mom, I started to understand where her anger was also coming from. So not only was I angry as the sister, but I was also angry as now a mother myself. And we finally had a victim coordinator at that time and she walked us through the process and she was great, but it still didn't take away my anger. So maybe about a year or so later, I left the courthouse because I had become so jaded and I couldn't work in that environment anymore. It just was too much for me. So I moved on to work for a bail reform company. And I learned how our system actually works and that it is very unfair to people of color and people who are of a lower socioeconomic groups. And it made me angry, but angry in a different way. And it made me want to make a change. And how do I make this change was my next question. So I worked there for about a year. And then I moved on to work for the public defender's office as a legal assistant. And I got to kind of dig in a little bit more and see like the injustices that was happening to our clients. And our clients had mental health issues. They had direct trauma growing up. And all of these things came to play, when it came to a sentencing for them. And they were getting sentences of like 20, 30, 40 years. And no one was thinking, how do we rehabilitate? How do we fix this? How do we go from being punitive to restorative? And it all started to click. And so about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half before the pandemic, I finally said, okay, I'm ready. This is it. I need closure. I need to do this. I'm getting older. I can't let this hang over my head anymore. I can't let Brian have control over my life. I can't let what happened dominate my every waking moment. So I reached out to the state of Maryland Department of Corrections, and I said, hey, I really want to do a victim offender dialogue. And in Maryland, they're basically unheard of, because if you try to Google it in Maryland, it's almost impossible. But I am a bulldog. So I searched and searched, and I finally called, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 people through Department of Corrections. And by the time I got to the last person, they were like, yeah, we've heard of you. Okay, what do you need us to do? So they said, well, you have to meet with our facilitator, and her name is Lauren. And before you can even go forward, you have to meet with her, because she has to make sure that you are mentally and emotionally ready for this process. So the 3 or 4 months went by. I still didn't hear anything. I called back, and they said, we didn't forget about you. Don't worry. We're still working this out. So about 2 months later, Lauren finally called me. We had an amazing chat, and it was great. And she was like, why do you want to do this? Let me know what's going on in your head. I want to make sure you're doing this for all the right reasons. And I just basically said to her, I just need closure. I just want to meet him. I want to talk to him. When I was in court before, the things I said were horrible. And I said it coming from an angry place. And I'm not there I'm not angry anymore. So I want to have a one-on-one and just see what happens. And so she agreed to reach out to Brian and see if he was up for it as well. And he was. So about a month later, she called me and she said, okay, everything's, worked out. When do you want to go? And reality hit. And I was like, oh, wait, this is serious? Oh, okay, wait, okay. And so it was right around the holidays. It was like Thanksgiving. And I was like, oh, I can't do it Christmas time because that'll ruin my holiday. I can't do that. And I can't do it in January because it's my son's birthday. And I can't do March because that's my birthday. And she was like, look, we got to do this because he can, at any time say he doesn't want to do it. So the sooner we get this done, the better. So I said, okay. So we agreed to a date in January. Well, at the end of December, the furlough hit, and I'm a government employee and I'm an essential worker. So I had to request permission from my boss to take a day off to do this dialogue. And my boss was great about it. And he wished me luck and said I could do it. So I got to the facility. My best friend was with me and I was in the parking lot. I was a little nervous. And Lauren said, are you ready? And I was like, Lauren, I just drove 70 miles. I just, I put gas in my car. Like, I'm not turning around. Like, I'm going to do this. We're good. So when I get nervous, I tend to talk a lot. And we're being led through the facility and doors are, the doors are closing behind us. And I was like, wow, this kind of feels like lockup. And the case manager was like, it's not, this is real. And, we're going to go into the room. So I see some dogs running around the facility and I was like, did someone's dog get loose? And they told me that they actually have a program for service dogs. And so those that are incarcerated, they work with the service dogs. And I thought that was beautiful. And so I was really excited to learn more about it. And we eventually get into the room and Brian comes in and he's in a separate room. And so Lauren has to prep both of us for a few minutes. And the first thing Brian said was that he wanted a confidentiality agreement because he didn't want anything that was said between us to be shared with anyone or anything like that. And I refused. And I said, anything that's said, it's going to be between us. I don't feel that we need to sign this confidentiality agreement. And I was a little hurt because I thought it was his way of kind of backing out of it. And I was told by his case manager that the reason he asked for it is because, one, his case is still on appeal. And he was afraid that anything that was said between us, I would take back to a prosecutor and share that. And his other concern was that in some way I would go to the media. And when he finally came into the room, I said, Brian, or I told the case manager, I said, like, my brother was an amazing person, but my brother's story is not going to be on Dateline. It's not going to be on 2020. Like, that is not my intent. So we eventually worked through that. And they brought Brian into the room. And the first thing I did was hug him, because I didn't see him as the person who took my brother. I didn't see him as an offender. I saw him as a person. And he was a person who deserved respect. And regardless of what had happened that night, he was still a person. And I gave him that respect. And it just felt natural. And I think it caught him completely off guard because he backed up. And it was just one of those moments that just felt right. And we sat down and we talked for about 90 minutes. And we had the most incredible conversation. And he shared a lot about David. And as the more I talked to him, I learned that they were actually more than acquaintances. They had become friends. And I asked him, what did he do? Like, what was his daily life like? And he said that he got up at 5 a.m. and he went to his job at the laundry. And when he was done, he would go back and watch the news and he would work on his case. And I'm a huge reader. So I was like, well, do you read? Like, what else do you do? And he said, we have 100 books in our library. I have read all 100 of them. I don't have anything else to read. We talked about science and math because these were the things that he loved. He told me about his childhood. And I asked him why he didn't work with the dogs. And he told me that when he was a little boy, his father had a dog attack him. And so he was deathly afraid of dogs. And as a mom, all I could think was, how dare you do that to your child? How do you hurt your child? And we just talked and everything just flowed and it felt natural. And at one point, he apologized. And I never asked what he was apologizing for. I assumed it was for what had happened that night, but I didn't ask because I didn't want to know the details at that moment. I have read the trial transcripts, the motions transcripts, the post-conviction transcripts. In my mind, I don't believe it was an intentional act. And that is what I will carry with me. I don't want to think that someone intentionally set out to hurt my brother. I think that given the circumstances of what happened that night, it was an accident. And I accepted his apology for whatever he was apologizing for. And in the same moment, I apologized for how I treated him. And he told me that I didn't owe him an apology, but I really did. Because again, he was a human being. And regardless of what we do in our lives, one bad thing or 20 bad things, it doesn't define us. It doesn't make us who we are. It is one act. And we should be forgiven for that act. And we shouldn't be punished to the 10th degree and be put in a cage and forgotten about, or only be allowed out for an hour of day. Who does that help? Because at the end of the day, the governor of Maryland can say, I'm going to let you out tomorrow, and Brian has no skills. He told me that because he is serving a life sentence, he is not allowed to earn an associate's degree. He is limited to getting his GED, and that's it. So again, tomorrow he could be released, and the only skills he has is to wash clothes. That to me is so beyond cruel and inhumane. Because how is he going to be a productive member of society? So we continued our conversation. And in the end, he asked how my mom was. He asked how my brother was, my other brother and my sister. And he told me that his family didn't get a chance to visit very often. They live in DC, so it's kind of hard for them transportation wise. And I left with the promise that I would come back and visit. And on my way home, I called my mom and I told her what happened. And my mom said, well, it is now your job to take care of him. You are now his caretaker, and you are now to make sure he is okay. Didn't really sink in at that moment, but I understood what she meant later. And I made plans to come back a few months later to visit. And when I got there, we were again in separate rooms before we would come together. And it didn't work out. He again wanted a confidentiality agreement, wouldn't budge on it. And we just never met. And it was okay because Lauren was there, the case manager was there. When he went back to his job, I started crying and I just started venting because I was angry, but not angry that it didn't work or not angry at him, just angry at our system. And they were gracious enough to let me vent and cry for an hour. And I left and I was like, I have to change something. And I got back to work the next day and my coworker said, hey, I think you might be interested in this restorative justice training. And I had heard about restorative justice, but I didn't really know what it was. And so I was like, okay, I'll go. And I fell in love with the training and the whole idea of restorative justice. And I went back a few months later for an advanced training. And a couple months after that, I became a facilitator. And I've been a restorative justice facilitator with the DC Peace team for over a year now. And I've worked with various groups from reentry and colleges and co-op groups, birth workers. And it's been amazing work because we all have trauma. Whether or not it's seen or unseen, it's there and we have it. And we find ways to help people deal with that and begin their healing. And it has been one of the most powerful things for me to experience, seeing someone else go through the process of finding their own healing. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a week or two. Sometimes it takes years. In my case, 26 years. And it's possible. And I just go forward in life thinking our system has to change. Because if we don't change it, more people are going to continue to be be harmed. And if we don't heal, we're no good to ourselves or to society. And so I look at it as I'm living out something David would want me to do, because David was very much a forgiving person. And he was the type of person that was so loving and so understanding and ready to just help anyone. And so I can only imagine that he would say, get up, start doing this, make this happen, do it for me. And I try to do that. And little by little, it's becoming part of me, not all David. It's becoming part of me too. I'm becoming who I am. And so I'm a huge advocate for restorative justice. And I wish that we could abolish prisons and figure out how to not punish people in ways that will only traumatize them more. So thank you.
But we're able to leave the past in the past and look, when we often tell people in prison that the past does not have to dictate the future. And a lot of times they don't believe that. I've had opportunity to speak in many a prison chapel time, and they're often hopeless. They don't believe that anyone, never mind God, but anyone can see them as redeemable. And when they begin to see and hear that someone does, it makes a big difference and it helps them look at themselves a lot different. We want to see people change. We want to see the revolving door that Heather alluded to back to prison and jails slowed, if not stopped completely. And the way we do that is by helping people see that the past doesn't have to dictate the future. Heather, maybe a little bit about your experience as a restorative justice facilitator and your work with young people.
Yeah, thank you. So it really varies from group to group. When I worked with the birth workers in DC, they were experiencing some racial tension between the people of color and the non-people of color. And my co-facilitator and I worked with them in different stages. We had an 18-hour session between the two groups, and we worked with the Black and people of color first in two separate groups, or I'm sorry, in two separate sessions, where we were able to build a level of trust in our first session. Our second session, we went a little bit deeper, and they were allowed to share the harms that had been happening. And then the following week, we did a separate group with the white birth workers, and same thing. The first session was to build trust. The second session was to go a little bit deeper into the harm that had been caused. And our final session, we brought both groups together, and they were at a point where they felt they could trust us, and they were in a safe space, and they could share with one another that maybe they wouldn't have been able to share a few weeks before. So that was definitely one of my favorite groups to work with. I also worked with a co-op group in Pittsburgh, and there had been an ongoing tension that my co-facilitator and I did not know about when we started the circle. So we kind of went in blind, and we didn't know anything at all. And maybe about 3 hours in, we were finally like, can you tell us what happened? Like, we're kind of lost here. And they told us that it was something that had happened with people that were no longer part of the co-op anymore, but they were still feeling the harm from it. So we were able to give them some tools to take back to the other members of the co-op who weren't there. And so that was another good one. Just, working with people who, when they initially start these circles, feel like this isn't going to work. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know, what you're going to do. I'm not going to change my mind. I understand it, because I felt the same way going into my victim offender dialogue. It was kind of like, I want to do this, but what's going to happen? And it's very like, there's a lot of uncertainty, and you just don't know. And I would say the difference between my dialogue and doing our circles is I had been prepped for months beforehand. Whereas when we do our circles, sometimes we only have maybe a few sessions beforehand of like an hour or two to prep someone. Other times we go into it with no prep at all, other than the participants knowing this is what we're going to work on. And so it's finding what works for each group, and also being able to read your room and read the participants and know, okay, maybe this tactic is not going to work. We need to shift gears and then try something different. I've been in circles where we start off with like a really fun game and make it really light so that people can, release some of the anxiety going into it, and then hope that as we move forward, they're like, oh, okay, I'm feeling relaxed. I'm feeling okay. And on the other hand, I've been in circles where you can immediately feel the tension as you start. And our goal is to really work through the traumas, but at the end of that circle, be able to bring people out of that pain and have them land in a good spot. That's the tricky part. Really just knowing your participants, knowing kind of like what the main issues are. Because when I did my first intro, one of the questions was, our very first question was, take an object that you have, describe what that object means to you, and then someone else will repeat back what it means to them. So I have a tattoo of David, his last tattoo. And so I was like, this is my item. And I broke down crying, but they weren't sad tears. It was happy tears, because I was trying to remember like a good memory. My facilitators, they didn't know that they were happy tears, and they were like, whoa, is everything okay? Are you okay? And they pulled me out of the circle, and they pulled me out, and I was like, no, I'm good. It's happy tears. So it's being able to understand that maybe you think something's one way, but it's actually a different, it's different. So they believed that I was sad, but I was actually happy. I was in a circle once, and we have our participants check out, and we say 1 is the lowest, 10 is the highest. And our participant said she was a 3. So we thought we heard her wrong, and we were like, oh, maybe she reversed it and she thinks 3 is like good. And then we thought about it, and we were like, wait, is everything okay? And she's like, no, 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 it's not you all, it's me. And so we were like, oh, okay. So we just had to like pick up on a, you know, a clue like that. So every circle is definitely different. And in Maryland, unfortunately, we don't have restorative justice in our criminal justice system. It's very, very limited. You have to ask for it. And DC has, on the other hand, an amazing criminal restorative justice program with their Attorney General's office, and they use it for juvenile cases, and it has been extremely successful. So more states are using it. It's very popular in Colorado and Texas, California. Unfortunately, it's not moving forward in Maryland as much as I would like. So that is my goal, to push it forward in Maryland and have it become the norm in our criminal justice system here. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, maybe just sharing with Heather what you thought, what you felt? Any questions for her by anyone at all?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Heather. I just wanted to thank you for sharing that. You know, I'm feeling pretty raw by our experience with my son. And I have not heard the term restorative justice, so I have a lot of Googling to do. And I'm excited to learn more about it. And I just wanted to share also that so my son has only been in for just under 3 months so far, but he's already talking about how it's changed his whole viewpoint of our criminal justice system, and how what I think one of you said earlier, that it doesn't, there's no purpose served to put someone and lock them up for 23 hours a day. And how everybody in there has a story that, you know, usually includes trauma. And, you know, I was teasing him a little bit the other day. I'm really lucky that he's able to call at least twice a day. So we talk a lot. And I said, well, maybe you'll become an advocate for the criminal justice system changing. And he said, maybe I will. And, you know, his skill is cabinet making, so I'm not sure how that'll work out, but it was really validating for me to hear these words spoken, because that we're already feeling, you know, in just the short time we've been dealing with our system here. So thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I also wanted to just thank you for being so emotionally vulnerable and sharing that with us. And it just made me think of, well, I know that our club at Dartmouth, we talked a lot about, when we were reading Our Prison's Obsolete by Angela Davis, we talked a lot about how it's just this kind of mentality in the United States where when someone does something bad, we just want to lock them up. Like, it's just so like omnipresent, I guess, in all of our minds, and how, but it was just amazing to hear how that it was your knee-jerk reaction to be really upset, and how you kind of worked through your own trauma and changed your kind of whole mindset. I thought that was just really beautiful. So thank you for sharing that again.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Heather, thank you again for sharing. So I work in a number of different groups, and there's, excuse me just a minute, shifting over here. There's in my area, there's a through the American Friends Service Association, there's a man who's trying to coordinate different people who are trying to reform the criminal justice system. And one of the things he's doing is looking at restorative justice, and he's looking at, one of the things he's doing is reentry. And he's trying to find communities of care, communities that will gather around an individual who's just coming out of prison, and because he himself has a similar history. So I'm actually a clergy person, and I'm trying to connect churches to his work. So my question is, in the restorative justice process, in the circle process, what I've read is that, it originally, when it was in the indigenous, when it was being started out by the indigenous people, there were elders and people that were wise that were part of this circle. Do you see a place for community members, older people of wisdom, that might come alongside somebody, either the victim or the perpetrator, or just as listeners or sages or people who care? Do you see a place for, I'm thinking congregations, but just people, good people, even people of no faith, to come alongside and be a volunteer in this restorative justice program?
Yeah, I do. I see it a little bit in my community. Catholic Charities here in our area, they have a volunteer program where the people help those who are reentering, and they provide like mentorship to them. And it's extremely successful. And I think that it's something that someone who is reentering society, they need that support group. And it could be, someone who has already been through everything and can be there by their side and say, well, this may happen next. Here's how you prepare for it. Or it could be someone who is just a lay person in the community who's like, why don't you come over for dinner and just share some space and, share some time together. Because sometimes I feel like people get, that we put this stigma and stereotype on people who have been incarcerated, and we don't look past that. And as a community, we have to think there's been plenty of times we've done things that have probably not been looked at by others as, right or correct. And so the reason we don't get judged to the same way that those who are reentering is because we've never been incarcerated. And at the end of the day, we're all people. We've all made mistakes. So I feel like our community should and needs people like that. I just wish we could remove that stigma so that more people would be willing to do it and not afraid of being associated with someone, who's reentering. To me, at the end of the day, what you did or didn't do, it's not for me to judge. And I just wish that, more people were like that. And so I really look at Catholic Charities as a really good example here in our area that is completely open and willing and to just wrap their arms around people. And I'm sure there are other groups. It's the only one I know of, specifically because I reached out to them. But yeah, I think our society needs that. Our communities need that.